Hello, I'm Congressman Tim Burchett, and I'm joined by my dear friend, Miss Sonja Dubois. Sonja, thank you so much for being here.
My honor.
Sonja and I met years ago. My mom and daddy were still alive. I was fortunate enough to be put on the State Holocaust Commission. My buddy Steve Cohen, we were both in the Senate together, and we were on it. And for some reason, we were at a meeting, and I thought, I guess God was talking to me. He said, you ought to think about doing a Holocaust memorial there in Knoxville. And I thought about it. When I met several Holocaust survivors, I asked one of them, who liberated you? And he grabbed me by this little Jewish man, grabbed me by the hand and walked me across. And there was this great big old tall lanky guy who was an Army private during the Second World War, and he was part of a group that liberated uh, one of the concentration camps. And I just thought, man, this is surreal almost, I guess, because Daddy fought in the Second World War, and Mama lost a brother fighting fighting the Nazis. Daddy fought the Japanese in the Pacific, and so I went home and I researched the areas, and I thought, well, heck, why not do it in West Hills Park? West Hills is where I grew up, and it was one of the, I guess, I found out later, it's one of the first open neighborhoods that anybody could live there. They had all these they were unconstitutional, discriminatory rules about who could and who couldn't live. But anyway, West Hills is where I grew up, and families of all denominations lived there, as did most of Knoxville. And so we built this memorial there, and my buddy Bernie Bernstein, who's since passed away, gave me the words to put on the monument there, and we planted 7 cedar trees in honor of the 7 million that were murdered. And one day my mama and daddy and I were out there working, and this sweet lady walked up and asked us what we were doing, and we told her, and it turned out she was a survivor. She was one of the hidden children.
Oh, that's right.
And she, it's a cool story of survival. It's not talked about a lot. It's just basically Jewish folks who knew that when the Nazis were coming, they had to do something with their kids. They did not want their kids to perish in those god-awful concentration camps. And this family gave their child up, not knowing and probably not wanting to know where they went. So fast forward, my friend Sonja Dubois is one of those people, and I'm honored to have her here in my house, and her story is incredible, and I'm glad we can share it with y'all.
My parents were Maurits and Sophie Ventine. They only got to live until they were 29 years old. I was their only child, Clara, and I was left behind when I was 21 months old. We lived in the Netherlands. I was born in Rotterdam. Mother and Daddy started their lives in the old city. Rotterdam used to have canals, just like Amsterdam. But after the bombing, 3 hours of solid bombing, there were no more canals. And things went really bad for Jews very quickly. Now, it also shows that it wasn't just the Jewish population that suffered. Over 1,000 people died that day. Mother and Daddy only lost their apartment. But as I said, for Jews, things went bad very quickly. They weren't allowed to go to movies, to public buildings. Shopping was only allowed after 4 o'clock in the afternoon at stores that did not say no Jews, and there were a lot of them. So food was already pretty scarce then. They weren't allowed to go to parks. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. They were allowed to go to parks, but you can't sit on the benches. And there were a lot of collaborators. You know, the Nazi could not have done this in any country in Europe all by themselves. They had helpers, collaborators everywhere. By 1941, Jews could own no property, they had no jobs, and curfews were established. Cannot be out between 8 and 6. Now, everybody carried ID. Everybody carried ID. And if you were a Jew, you better either be wearing your David Star either on. Men often wear them on their headband, on their armbands, and women would have to pin them to their clothing. And would you believe they had to pay for them by themselves? Daddy's best friend, Dolph Hankus, was the one who took care of me for a while and found a safe place. The reason that he was such a close friend of Daddy's is that they were artists together. Daddy painted this wonderful picture for me, but he didn't live long enough to become professional. Dolph did, as a matter of fact. He's online, and anybody who wants to look him up. Anyhow, yes, I was given to him when I was 21 months old. I became an orphan. They left me behind when everyone was told to pack a suitcase and report to the train station. And yes, they did report, but I was already in a safe place with Dolph. So they hoped I would live. And that's why I tell their story, because their hopes realized. I speak to groups, to schools, wherever I'm asked. Their bravery is unbelievably important to me. Now, you remember I said Jews had no jobs. And so over every camp, these words were printed. Arbeit macht frei. Work will make you free. And that's the railroad right into Auschwitz camp, which very, very few people survived. My parents didn't. Their parents didn't. My aunts and uncles didn't. I'm the only survivor of that entire family. Here we have a picture of people who have just been unloaded from the camp cars. There are women and children, almost like babies, and that picture really haunts me because these little children, just like the adults, were stripped naked when they got to the gas chamber. And there were no men because they had already become slave laborers. Now, they didn't live very long because the conditions were horrendous. And there was vermin, there was hardly any food, and the food that was served was just some gray soup. But Clara and Dolph traveled to Buccolo, which was a small farm community. The reason we went there is because that's where I was to be hidden with my aunt and her new husband, who lived in a chicken house, who were hidden in a chicken house with 9 other people. But Dolph decided it wasn't a good place for me. So he came back and got me. I have no idea how long I was there, but those folks, those 9 folks, lived there for almost another year and a half before they were betrayed. And they all ended up in camps. Now, Dolph took me to a place called, it's a community on the Maas River called Katendrecht. And if there was any place that was safe, that's was the one, because it was a red light district and the Nazi soldiers were not allowed to go there. 1 or 2 might have slipped down, but if there was a safe place, that was it. And Fee Hartog took me across in a little tugboat to Rotterdam proper, where I met Mom and Pop. Now, I'm no longer Clara. They renamed me Sonja. I lost my identity, and I learned to be grateful for being saved. It was an ongoing mantra. And I didn't think I was a Holocaust survivor for a long time, because I wasn't in camp. I wasn't hungry. So was I? It was just an emotional trip that I lived the rest of my life. They didn't have any children, so I was probably pretty lonesome, except the days that I went to preschool. That was lovely. But it was also another place to be found out by collaborators. The teachers, they didn't ask questions, but the parents who picked up their little children probably did. But, we did. Questions got too personal and Mom and Pop couldn't or wouldn't ask them, we just moved across town. You could do that then. No newspapers and certainly no little cell phones to carry around. So we moved 3 times during that time. That's also the time that most of my memories came through. I was told to never, never go to the picture window. We lived on the 2nd story with very shiny windows, and for some reason, just like anybody else, I went to the window eventually. And what drew me there was the sound of a drum, a regular beat of a drum. So was this a parade? It was late afternoon, kind of rainy. Why would there not be a crowd watching a parade? There wasn't. All I saw was a long row of men, seemingly of all ages. No costumes, they were just drab clothing. Some wore caps, some didn't. And they were marched around the corner. We lived just a half a mile away from the train station. And once they got around the corner, of course I didn't know this for many, many years, they were also put on trains. And many of them didn't see their community again. Oh, and how do you feed a little girl? There were already soup kitchens in our city. Now, you can't bring up a kid on soup kitchen food. Some dark bread and a little kettle of soup. So I had an aunt. Well, I had lots of aunts. If I were in the Netherlands now, I would not be Miss Sonja. I'd be Aunt Sonja. So I had friends of Mom and Pop who took care of me. One lady brought milk. She still had a cow. And the aunt and uncle that I walked to as a child, Didn't cross streets, I don't think. No, I didn't cross streets. Fed me a hot meal every day. So I wasn't hungry. I really wasn't. But Pop and I did steal some beet pieces. He would be cutting sugar beets, and I would ask him for a piece, and he'd say, "Shh, don't tell Mom." They used to simmer that stuff and made syrup out of it. And that's another smell. Smells are very potent for me. They bring back memories. Kerosene will give me an instant headache. And that's because if we had any food, it would be simmered on a little kerosene stove, which seemed to smoke up the room. Oh, that room, we inhabited for everything, I think. I know we ate there, we visited there. Maybe we even slept here sometimes because there was no heat. People would cut down trees. Some of them even ended up burning some of their furniture just to have some heat. Or they would pass along the railroad stations and pick up pieces of coal that had dropped. So things were pretty bad. I have had a true aunt. Her name was Tante Singh. Yes, she was a Jewish lady, but she was in a mixed marriage. Her husband was a well-to-do Christian, and at the time, Nazis were not deporting us. So, come to think that Mother and Daddy must have known they weren't coming back because they left some wedding presents with them. And my most precious possession is my garnet necklace. The only thing I have that Mother wore. And I only wear it when I talk about them. It's very, very precious to me. They're garnets, but even if they weren't precious stones, it would still be precious to me. Now, Tante Singh had a right to take me. Any person who had a relative who was Jewish could take that person, no questions asked. But they saw that I was well taken care of by Mom and Pop. So they left me there. The only thing I think that was probably a pact that was made, she must never know who we are, that we are blood relations. And that is why when we visited, I would be sent either to be with the maid or go into the other room with a coloring book, and they would talk about me. It was the strangest feeling even then. But I tell you that they did care for me. That piano could not have been purchased by Mom and Pop. Those things weren't available to middle class folks. That was a brand new oak piano. And that's a day, this day, on a Wednesday afternoon, they told me that Mother and Daddy had died. Do I remember them? No, I wasn't even 2 years old. I don't remember answering to the name Clara. Well, some people say, how come you didn't go back to your birth name? But I don't remember answering to it. So they named me Sonja, and that was fine. Anyhow, the reason they told me is because you have to write your name, your birth name, Clara Van Dyne. You need to practice that because you're going to write it in. You're going to write it in your passport when we go and immigrate to America. So that's what I learned to write my name when I was almost 12 years old. And my birth family sure was involved because distant relatives became our sponsor. I never knew this until I researched my book. Here's a smiling picture of Sonja. I'm now an American teen. It's 1953. I love being an American teenager. 5th or 6th grade, I learned to write and I learned to speak English. This is long before ESL, of course. I just learned by the seat of my pants. And I'm told I was lingual in 3 months. So you see, practice makes perfect. It's now 1962, and I become Mrs. Dubois with Mom and Pop at the formal wedding. I finally wrote my memoirs. Finding Shifra completed my life. I finally did it in 2019. Shifra is my Hebrew name. Shifra was still way back burner because I had a family to bring up. And delving into your past is all encompassing. Just too much to deal with. It's now 1990. And my cousin, yes, cousin Bev called me. Took 3 times. We had an answering machine, so, modern communication helped. And she says, I think we may be cousins. Right. Cousins? I don't have any family. Except her parents and grandparents got out on one of the last boats out, 1939 to 1940. She wasn't born until 1946, but her big sister, Jocelyn, was a baby when they left. And so I got to meet them. We went to Tel Aviv and met the relatives I didn't know I had. I met Aunt Alice, who I wax on about in my memoir. I actually got to meet her. And it was a wonderful, I can't call it a reunion because it was the first time we met. Now, I call myself the matriarch of a new family. When Ron and I married, we started all over. I have 2 daughters, 3 grandsons, 2 granddaughters, and 2 great-grandgirls and little grandson. little great-grandson. So yes, the family did die. We started over. But it wasn't until 2021 that I got to see the chicken house, the ruins of the chicken house, the place where I was hidden for a while, where the people who lived there didn't survive either. So it was very emotional. And I believe in deja vu. I couldn't have remembered that place. Still, I felt I'd been there. Never heard about survivor's guilt. Yeah, I heard about it, but I didn't know what it was. I visited the site where the trains left from in Canada. And there's this memorial built for the children who didn't come back. There are 616 names engraved in the monument. And you'd think I'd be pleased and happy that my name wasn't there? Not so. Why me? There were plenty of times that I could have been betrayed or given up. No, Mom and Pop wouldn't give me up. But it was a moment where I learned how grateful I must be.